The music stopped first, not gradually, not politely. It cut off mid-note, violins strangled into silence, as every head in the grand ballroom snapped toward the sound of glass shattering against marble. A champagne flute lay in pieces near the center of the room, and standing right beside it was her. Her hands were shaking so badly that the pen nearly slipped from her fingers. Tears streamed down her face, hot and uncontrollable, dropping onto the crisp white papers spread across the gold-trimmed table in front of her. Divorce papers. At a Christmas party. The red and gold decorations above her blurred as her vision filled with tears. A massive Christmas tree towered behind the stage, its lights still blinking cheerfully, oblivious to the humiliation unfolding beneath it. Snow machines continued to hiss softly near the ceiling, releasing artificial flakes that drifted down like mockery. Laughter broke out, not gentle laughter, not nervous chuckles, cruel laughter. "Go on," a man's voice rang out, sharp and confident, amplified by the microphone he still held. "Sign it, that's what you came here for, isn't it?" He smiled as he spoke. A wide, practiced smile, the kind meant for boardrooms and magazine covers. The kind that made people believe he was charming, successful. Untouchable, Richard Hale, billionaire real estate tycoon, media darling, host of tonight's exclusive Christmas gala, and her husband, or soon her ex-husband. She stood there in a simple navy blue dress, elegant but modest, completely out of place among the glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos surrounding her. Diamond necklaces sparkled at every table. Crystal chandeliers reflected wealth in 1,000 fractured lights, and yet every eye in the room was fixed on her, waiting. Watching her break. "Don't do this here," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her own heart. "Please, Richard, we can talk privately." Richard laughed into the microphone. "Privately?" he repeated as if she'd just told a joke. "Oh, no, 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 that ship sailed when you decided to embarrass me for years with your silence." A ripple of laughter followed him, nervous at first, then eager. People loved a spectacle when it wasn't their own life on display. He gestured dramatically toward her. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard announced, lifting his glass, "what better way to celebrate Christmas than closure?" The word echoed in the vast room. Closure. She felt the floor tilt beneath her heels. Her fingers tightened around the pen. The paper trembled. She hadn't wanted this. She hadn't asked for this. But here she was, cornered, exposed, stripped of dignity in front of the most powerful people in the city. A woman at the front table leaned toward her companion and whispered loudly, "Isn't she the quiet one, the nobody wife?" Another voice followed. "I heard she married him before he really made it. Guess she didn't grow with him." Someone snickered. "Poor thing, she should be grateful he's letting her go with anything at all." Each word cut deeper than the last. Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound intimate, but the microphone still caught every syllable. "Look at you," he said softly. "Always hiding behind those sad eyes. You never belonged in my world." Her lips parted, but no sound came out, not because she had nothing to say, because if she spoke, she knew she would shatter completely. Richard leaned in, smiling for the cameras already recording from several angles. "Sign the papers," he whispered. "Or do you want everyone to hear how little you actually contributed to my success?" Her breath hitched. She glanced down at the document. "I hereby waive all claims." Her name was printed at the bottom in neat black letters, waiting for her signature. This was supposed to be a private agreement. This was supposed to happen quietly. Not here, not tonight, not like this. A tear splashed onto the paper. Richard straightened and turned to the crowd again. "She's been living off my generosity for years," he declared. "Never worked a day in her life, never understood business, never understood ambition." He paused. "And now she wants to walk away like she deserves half." Gasps rippled through the room. She shook her head desperately. "That's not true," she finally said, her voice cracking. "I never asked for—" "Oh, stop," Richard snapped, dropping the smile. His eyes hardened. "You asked for plenty, you just weren't smart enough to know it." Silence fell, the kind that presses against your ears. Then Richard raised his glass again. "Come on," he said brightly. "Let's not drag this out, Christmas spirit and all that." He pointed to the signature line. "Sign it." Her shoulders collapsed inward as if she were trying to disappear inside herself. Her hand hovered above the paper, trembling. Around her, phones were raised discreetly. Someone would leak this by morning. The headlines would feast on it. "Billionaire humiliates ex-wife at Christmas gala." She swallowed hard. Her entire body felt numb. This was the end of something. She could feel it. Not just the marriage, something deeper, something she'd protected quietly for years. Richard watched her like a predator, enjoying the final moments of the hunt. "Look at everyone," he said softly, gesturing around. "They're all waiting, don't disappoint them." Her pen touched the paper. A sob escaped her lips, and just as the ink began to flow, a deep, authoritative voice cut through the ballroom. "Richard Hale!" Every head turned. Richard froze mid-smile. The voice came from the entrance, slow, calm, unyielding. "I strongly suggest," the voice continued, "you take your hand off that microphone." The room went dead silent. Richard turned slowly, irritation flashing across his face. "What is this?" he snapped. "This is a private event." The man at the entrance didn't move. He was older, silver hair, tailored black coat, presence heavy enough to bend the air around him. Two people stepped aside instinctively as he walked forward. Richard squinted. "I don't recall inviting." The man's eyes shifted, not to Richard, to her, still standing there, still crying, still holding the pen. And when he spoke again, his voice trembled, not with anger, but with something far more dangerous. "Payne, put the papers down," he said gently. "You don't need to sign anything." Richard laughed sharply. "Oh, this is rich," he scoffed. "Another hero, security." The man raised one finger. Richard stopped. "I said," the man repeated louder now, "put the papers down." Something in his tone made the room feel suddenly smaller. She looked up, confused, tears blurring her vision. Their eyes met. And in that moment, something flickered across his face. Recognition, relief, love. Richard frowned. "What is this?" he demanded. "Who are you?" The man took one final step forward, his voice ringing through the hall like a verdict. "You have no idea," he said, "who you are humiliating." A murmur swept through the crowd. Richard scoffed again, but there was uncertainty now. "Oh, really?" The man's gaze never left her. "She is not just your wife," he said. He paused, and the silence screamed. "She is," she gasped. The pen slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the marble floor. Richard's smile finally began to fade, because in that instant, standing beneath the Christmas lights with divorce papers at her feet, the truth was about to destroy everything he thought he owned. But before we see how this ends, let's go back to where this story truly began, 3 years earlier. Long before the chandeliers, the cameras, and the crushing silence of that Christmas night, she woke up before dawn. Not because she had to impress anyone, not because someone demanded it, but because that was who she was. The small apartment was quiet except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the faint sound of traffic far below. Pale morning light slipped through the thin curtains, painting the walls in soft gray-blue shadows. Emily Hale sat on the edge of the bed, tying her hair into a loose knot. Her movements were careful, unhurried, like someone who had learned long ago that peace came from simplicity. The apartment was modest, too modest, most people thought, for the wife of a billionaire. But Emily had insisted. She liked spaces that felt lived in, real, places where laughter didn't echo emptily off marble walls. She slipped on a cardigan, padded quietly into the kitchen, and started the kettle. As the water heated, she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded envelope, creased from being opened and closed far too many times. She didn't need to read it again. She already knew every word. Medical evaluation report. Her fingers tightened around the paper. The doctor had spoken gently, carefully, as if kindness might soften the truth. "Your father's condition is progressing faster than we expected." Alzheimer's, a word that still felt unreal. Her father, once a brilliant investor, a man who could read markets like poetry, was slipping away piece by piece. Some days he remembered her name. Some days he asked where her mother was, even though her mother had passed away 10 years ago. And some days he stared through her like she was a stranger. Emily pressed her lips together, fighting the familiar ache in her chest. She poured hot water into a chipped mug and wrapped her hands around it, grounding herself in the warmth. Today mattered. Today wasn't just another quiet day. Today was important. She glanced at the calendar taped to the fridge. December 23rd, circled in red, Christmas Gala Richard. She exhaled slowly. Richard's world was loud, bright, relentless. A world of deals and power moves and people who measured worth by net value. She had never belonged there. And yet, she had always supported him. When Richard had nothing but ambition and debt, Emily had been there, quietly selling inherited stock she never spoke about, covering expenses without questions, making sure the lights stayed on while he chased his dreams. She never told him where the money came from. She never wanted to, because love to her wasn't leverage, it was sacrifice. But over time, Richard changed. Success hardened him. Applause fed something darker inside him. The man who once thanked waiters by name now barely noticed them. The husband who once asked her opinion stopped asking altogether, and slowly he stopped seeing her. "She doesn't do anything," he joked once at a dinner party. Everyone laughed. Emily smiled politely. She always smiled. But what Richard never knew, what no one knew, was that Emily wasn't quiet because she was weak. She was quiet because she carried weight no one else could imagine, her father. The man who raised her with integrity and humility. The man whose empire once rivaled Richard's before he stepped away voluntarily, choosing peace over power. The man whose wealth was hidden behind layers of trusts, foundations, and anonymity. The man whose name still opened doors in rooms Emily never entered. Jonathan Reed, a billionaire who hated being called one. Emily checked her watch. She needed to visit him before the gala. The care facility was just outside the city, peaceful, clean, filled with gentle voices and soft music meant to soothe fragile minds. Jonathan sat by the window when she arrived, staring at falling leaves. "Hi, Dad," she said softly. He turned. For a moment, confusion flickered across his face, then recognition. "Emily," he said, smiling. "You're early." Relief washed through her. She knelt beside him, taking his hands. "I wanted to spend some time before tonight," she said. "It's almost Christmas." He nodded slowly. "Your mother loved Christmas," he murmured. Emily smiled, blinking back tears. "I know." They sat in silence for a while, then Jonathan's expression changed, sharpened, clearer than it had been in weeks. "You look tired," he said. She hesitated. "Just life," she replied gently. He studied her face with unsettling clarity. "Is he hurting you?" Her breath caught. "No," she said quickly. "No, Dad." "Not like that." Jonathan frowned. "Pain doesn't always leave bruises," he said. Emily looked away. She didn't trust herself to speak. Jonathan squeezed her hand. "You don't owe anyone your suffering," he said firmly. "Not even love," she swallowed. "I know." But the truth was she didn't know what else to do. Richard had asked her to come to the gala tonight, not invited, asked, told her it was time to finalize things. She didn't need to ask what he meant. The divorce papers had been sitting in her bag for days. She just hadn't expected public. Jonathan watched her carefully. "Promise me something," he said. She looked back at him. "If things turn ugly," he continued, "you walk away, you don't beg, you don't explain, you don't shrink." Emily nodded, even though her chest felt tight. "I promise." He smiled, satisfied. "Good," he said, "because some truths only reveal themselves when people show who they really are." That evening, as Emily stood in front of her mirror preparing for the gala, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She didn't wear jewels. She didn't wear designer labels. She wore dignity. She slipped the divorce papers into her bag, her hands trembling. This was it. Tonight would decide everything, not just her marriage, but her future. What Emily didn't know, what no one knew, was that this Christmas party wouldn't just end her past. It would expose a truth powerful enough to bring a billionaire to his knees. And Richard Hale was walking straight toward it, blindfolded by his own arrogance. The stage was set, and the confrontation was inevitable. The ballroom of the Hale Grand Hotel glittered like a jewel box turned inside out. Gold accents traced every archway. White roses spilled from crystal vases. A string orchestra played softly beneath the hum of elite conversation. Hedge fund managers, senators, celebrities, and corporate titans all wrapped in silk and self-importance. Emily stood just outside the entrance. For a moment, she didn't move. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her handbag, the weight of the divorce papers inside feeling heavier than stone. She could hear laughter through the doors, confident, effortless laughter, the kind that came from people who never worried about being disposable. She exhaled slowly. "You promised, Dad. Don't shrink." She stepped inside. No one noticed her at first. That hurt more than the stares would have. She moved along the edge of the room, past tables where champagne flowed freely and conversations stopped briefly as eyes flicked over her, then dismissed her. "She never dresses the part," someone murmured. "I heard she refused a stylist." "She thinks she's above it," another replied with a scoff. Emily pretended not to hear. She always did. The stage at the front of the room stood empty for now, decorated with poinsettias and a massive Christmas wreath bearing the Hale Group logo. A microphone gleamed under the lights. Richard was near the center of the room, laughing loudly, surrounded by investors. He looked flawless, tailored black suit, confident posture, charisma polished by years of applause. He hadn't seen her yet. Emily hesitated, then walked toward him. Each step felt like wading through water. "Richard," she said softly. He turned. The smile vanished instantly, not with surprise, with irritation. "You're late," he said flatly. "I came as soon as I could," she replied. "I visited my father." Richard's eyes flickered with annoyance. "Of course you did," he said. "Always an excuse." She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. He glanced around, noticing the curious eyes on them. "Walk with me," he said sharply. He didn't wait for her answer. They moved toward the stage, his hand gripping her elbow just tightly enough to remind her who had power here. She winced but said nothing. "Do you have the papers?" he asked under his breath. "Yes," she said. Good, he replied. We'll get this over with. She stopped walking. Here, she asked quietly. In front of everyone, he turned to her slowly, eyes cold. You wanted closure, he said. This is closure. Her heart began to race. Richard, please, she whispered. This isn't necessary. He leaned in close, his voice a hiss. What's not necessary, he said, is you pretending you deserve privacy. Before she could respond, Richard stepped onto the stage and took the microphone. The orchestra fell silent. The room turned toward him. Emily's stomach dropped. Friends, Richard began, smiling broadly. Thank you all for joining me tonight. Christmas is a time for honesty, don't you think? Polite laughter followed. Emily stood frozen at the bottom of the stage. Success, Richard continued, requires sacrifice and sometimes clarity. He gestured toward her. My wife, he said casually, has decided she no longer wishes to be part of this journey. A murmur spread. Emily's face burned. That's not, she began. Richard raised a hand, silencing her without even looking. She asked for a divorce, he said, and tonight, generously, I'm giving her one. Someone clapped. Others followed. Emily felt the room closing in. Richard beckoned her onto the stage. Her legs moved, though she wasn't sure how. Every step echoed. He placed the papers on the table and handed her a pen. Sign, he said into the microphone. She stared at the document, her hands shaking. This isn't what we agreed, she whispered. Richard smiled thinly. You agreed to leave, he replied. Details are flexible. The crowd watched with open fascination now. Someone whispered, this is brutal. Another replied, she should be grateful. Emily looked up at Richard, desperation finally breaking through her composure. I supported you when you had nothing, she said quietly. I never asked for recognition, I just wanted respect. Richard laughed. Support, he scoffed. You made tea and nodded while I built an empire. The words sliced through her. I sacrificed my life for you, she said, her voice breaking. And I outgrew you, Richard snapped. That's business. Laughter rippled again, uncomfortable but present. Emily felt utterly alone. She scanned the room. No one stepped forward. No one defended her, not a single voice. Her isolation was complete. Sign it, Richard repeated, his patience gone, or I'll make sure you leave with nothing. Her fingers closed around the pen. Tears blurred her vision. She lowered her head, shoulders shaking. The humiliation was unbearable. This was the moment Richard had been waiting for, the moment he could finally erase her in front of the world. And as Emily's pen hovered over the page, the atmosphere shifted. A ripple of tension passed through the crowd near the entrance. People turned. Whispers grew. Someone gasped. Richard frowned, annoyed at the interruption. What now? He muttered. That was when the voice came, low, steady, unignorable. Richard Hale. The name echoed. Richard froze. Slowly, he turned toward the entrance. A tall, silver-haired man stood there, flanked by two sharply dressed individuals who didn't look like security, but something far more powerful. Emily looked up. Her breath caught. Dad, she whispered. The man's eyes locked onto hers. Everything else in the room disappeared. He took one step forward, then another. Richard scoffed nervously. Who the hell are you? He demanded. This is a private matter. The man didn't even glance at him. He walked straight toward the stage, eyes never leaving Emily. Put the pen down, he said gently. Emily's hand trembled. Richard laughed loudly, trying to reclaim control. Oh, this is priceless, he sneered. Let me guess, you're here to rescue her? The man stopped at the base of the stage. Finally, he looked at Richard, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades of power. You don't get to decide her worth, he said calmly. Richard's smile tightened. And you do? The man stepped onto the stage. The room held its breath. Yes, he replied, because what was coming next would change everything. And Richard Hale was about to discover the cost of mistaking silence for weakness. The man stepped fully onto the stage. The lights caught his face now, lined not with age, but with authority. The kind that didn't need to shout. The kind that bent rooms without trying. A hush fell so complete that even the clink of glasses stopped. Richard straightened his jacket, forcing a laugh that came out thin. All right, he said, glancing at the crowd as if they were his shield. This has gone on long enough. Security, the man raised one hand, not high, not dramatic, just enough. And the head of hotel security, who had already started moving, froze mid-step. Richard noticed. His smile faltered. Excuse me, Richard snapped. Did you not hear me? Security didn't move. Whispers erupted across the room. Who is that? Why did security stop? I recognize him. Emily stood frozen, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. Dad, she whispered again, barely daring to believe he was really there. Jonathan Reed turned to her. For a moment, the ruthless stillness in his face softened. You shouldn't have had to stand here alone, he said quietly. Tears spilled freely down Emily's cheeks now. Richard scoffed, irritation bleeding into his voice. "This is your father," he said mockingly. "Congratulations, touching, but this is still my event, my hotel, and my marriage." Jonathan finally faced him fully. "My name," Jonathan said evenly, "is Jonathan Reed." The name struck the room like thunder. Gasps exploded from every corner. Several people stiffened instantly. A woman dropped her phone. A man at the front table went pale. Richard blinked, once, twice, then laughed. "Nice try," he said. "You expect me to believe?" "You were 12 years old," Jonathan interrupted calmly, "when Reed Global Holdings exited the public market." Richard faltered. "You were still in university when I sold my controlling interest and transferred assets into private trusts," Jonathan continued. "And you were just starting your first company when my foundation quietly invested in your second bailout round." The room buzzed. Richard's face drained of color. "That's impossible," he whispered. Jonathan stepped closer. "You've spent your entire career standing on the shadow of a man you never bothered to learn about," he said, "because he didn't crave attention." Richard swallowed hard. This is a joke," he stammered, but the certainty in his voice was gone. Jonathan turned to the crowd. "Many of you know me," he said. "Others know my work. Very few know my family." His gaze returned to Emily. "This," he said, voice thickening, "is my daughter." Silence, then an eruption. "Oh my God! No way! That's Jonathan Reed! The Jonathan Reed!" Emily felt her knees weaken. Richard stumbled back a step. "No," he said hoarsely, "that's not possible. She never said." "I never needed to," Emily whispered. Richard turned to her sharply. "You lied to me," he accused. Shook her head. "I protected myself," she replied. Jonathan's voice cut through the tension. "My daughter chose a quiet life," he said. "She married you for who you were, not what you had." He looked pointedly at the papers on the table. "And tonight you chose to humiliate her for an audience." Richard's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Jonathan reached into his coat and pulled out a thin folder. He placed it on the table beside the divorce papers. "Those documents," he said, tapping them, "are invalid." Richard's eyes snapped up. "What?" "You see," Jonathan continued, "the majority ownership of this hotel and several others under the Hale Group umbrella was never truly yours." The crowd gasped again. Richard shook his head violently. "That's a lie," he said. "I own this company." Jonathan slid one paper forward. "Read." Richard grabbed it, scanning the page. His hands began to shake. This says that Reed Family Trust holds a controlling interest," Jonathan finished for him. "And has for the last 8 years. Richard looked up slowly. His face had gone completely white. "You," he whispered, staring at Emily. "You knew." Emily nodded. "I never wanted power over you," she said softly. "I just wanted partnership." Jonathan's voice hardened. "But you wanted dominance." He turned to the room. "Let me be clear," he said. "I allowed my daughter to live freely, to love freely, even to make mistakes freely." He looked back at Richard. "I will not allow her to be publicly destroyed." Richard dropped the papers. They fluttered to the floor like dead leaves. "This can be fixed," he said quickly, panic breaking through. "Emily, we can talk. I didn't know." Emily took a step back. "There's nothing left to talk about," she said. Jonathan gestured toward the microphone. "Announce it," he told Richard. Richard stared at him, eyes wide. "Announce what?" Jonathan leaned in, his voice low and lethal. "That you are stepping down." The room held its breath. Richard looked around at the investors, the board members, the people who had laughed moments ago. None of them met his eyes. They were already calculating distance. "I built this," Richard whispered. Jonathan straightened. "No," he said, "you managed it." A beat. "And you managed it poorly." Richard's shoulders sagged. Defeat settled over him like a weight. With trembling hands, he picked up the microphone. His voice cracked. "Effective immediately," he said, barely audible. "I am resigning as CEO of Hale Group." A stunned silence followed, then whispers, then chaos. Emily felt something inside her finally loosen. Jonathan turned to her again, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now," he said. She exhaled shakily. For the first time in years, she believed it, but the reckoning wasn't over yet, not even close. Richard Hale stood frozen at the center of the stage, his mouth open as if to protest, but the words had fled. Every pair of eyes in the grand ballroom now weighed him, not as a billionaire, not as a powerful CEO, but as the man who had spent decades humiliating and belittling those he considered beneath him. Security discreetly closed in, surrounding him not with force, but with the subtle authority of consequence. Board members whispered among themselves, casting sharp, calculating glances. Investors were already pulling out their phones, sending texts, confirming details. The ripple effect of Richard's fall had begun, and there was no stopping it. Emily's gaze softened as she looked at him. This was not the moment for vengeance, not the first step, but justice was inevitable. The humiliation he had inflicted upon her was mirrored now in the eyes of everyone present. Jonathan stepped forward. "Richard Hale," he said slowly, each syllable deliberate, "you have spent years thinking you could belittle and control the lives of others with your wealth and position. Tonight the mask falls." Richard's voice quavered. This isn't fair. I built this hotel. I built this company. His protest faltered as the room collectively shook its head. Jonathan's hand rested firmly on Emily's shoulder. "Fairness is irrelevant here. Accountability is what matters." He turned to the assembled guests. "Effective immediately, Richard Hale is removed from all executive duties at Hale Group. The board has voted unanimously to appoint an interim CEO until new leadership is confirmed. And yes, that includes the board of this hotel, which has been under the Reed family trust's control all along." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Phones clicked. Tweets were being composed. Headlines were being born in real time. The arrogance of a man who had thought himself untouchable was crumbling like dry leaves. Richard's face went pale. His hands shook. "You can't do this," he whispered. "You can't take everything." Jonathan's gaze didn't waver. "Everything you think you own has been leveraged on your own ego. True ownership comes with responsibility, and responsibility is something you never understood." Emily finally stepped forward. She stood tall now, dignity radiating from her despite the tears that still lingered on her cheeks. "I am not here to destroy you, Richard," she said. Her voice, steady and calm, carried through the room. "I am here to reclaim my life and remind everyone that cruelty has a cost." The bystanders, who had been silent witnesses, now whispered in awe. The woman who had been humiliated earlier, trembling and vulnerable, was now standing as a figure of authority and grace. Richard's lips twisted. "You think you've won? You?" Emily shook her head gently. "I never needed to win. I needed to survive, and now, finally, I can." At that moment, one of the board members approached and handed Emily a folder. Inside were documents transferring full operational control of several key Hale Group assets to the Reed family trust. Her late father's plans had always included a fail-safe, ensuring that wealth and power would not be misused or exploited by someone like Richard. Tears welled in her eyes again, not of humiliation, but of relief. Jonathan leaned closer and whispered, "You've earned every bit of this, Emily. You were never powerless, you just didn't realize it yet." A hush fell over the room as Jonathan gestured to the microphone again. "Let this be a lesson. Leadership is not about fear or wealth. It is about integrity, character, and respect for others." Emily stepped forward, her voice stronger now. "And let this also be a reminder, true value does not come from money or titles. It comes from what we do with the influence we have and how we treat those around us. Everyone deserves dignity. And cruelty will always meet consequence." Richard's shoulders slumped further. There was no arguing, no negotiation. The power he had wielded over others for decades had evaporated in a single, undeniable revelation. He looked around the room at the people who had once admired him or feared him and found only disappointment and judgment. Security guided him quietly toward the exit, but not before several staff members, who had been silently suffering under his micromanagement and arrogance, paused to offer Emily small nods of respect. Some even whispered apologies for the fear they had felt, for the times they had hesitated to intervene. Emily's eyes swept over the staff and the board members. "Thank you," she said softly, "for seeing what needed to be done." Jonathan smiled at her, proud. "Now," he said, "let's celebrate the right things this Christmas, not the downfall of a man, but the rise of those who deserve to stand tall." A few hours later, as the gala wound down, Emily found herself sitting near the fireplace in a quiet corner. The chaos had subsided, replaced by the warmth of relief and justice fulfilled. Jonathan joined her, sitting beside her with a gentle smile. "You did wonderfully," he said, sipping a glass of water. "Faced fear, humiliation, and still carried yourself with grace." Emily looked down, fiddling with her cuff. "I never thought I could do it. I always felt small, invisible." Jonathan placed a hand on hers. "Invisible, Emily, you were invisible only because you chose to be humble, but humility is not weakness. Strength often hides in plain sight. You've proven that tonight." She laughed softly, a mix of disbelief and joy. I never wanted to use my father's name. I wanted to be." "Me, you are more than yourself," Jonathan replied. "You are a force of integrity, compassion, and intelligence, and tonight you reminded everyone in this room what that truly looks like." Emily felt a rush of gratitude and relief. After years of living quietly, sacrificing for others, and enduring subtle cruelty, she had finally stepped into her own power. Not to crush, not to dominate, but to reclaim her life with dignity and fairness. Jonathan continued, "And now you can help shape a world that values kindness over status, effort over appearance, and integrity over greed. That's the greatest gift you can give, not just to yourself, but to everyone around you." Emily looked around at the staff and remaining guests, many still whispering about the dramatic revelations. She realized something profound. This wasn't just about her victory over Richard. It was about the justice and redemption that extended to every quiet, overlooked person who had suffered in silence. She felt the room's energy shift. Fear and judgment gave way to admiration and respect. People began to approach her, offering congratulations and gratitude, not just for her role in the company, but for the courage she had shown in reclaiming her dignity in front of everyone. Jonathan's eyes met hers once more. "You've changed the story," he said softly, "and you've set the standard. Let's ensure it never happens again." Emily nodded. "Yes, no one should ever feel powerless in a world they helped build. Power isn't meant to dominate, it's meant to protect and uplift." She glanced one last time toward Richard, now escorted quietly out of the ballroom, and felt no anger, only clarity. His consequences were immediate and public. Her redemption was quiet, internal, and eternal. For Emily, justice had arrived, not as revenge, but as truth, accountability, and the unwavering recognition of her own worth. And as she watched the snow like confetti drift from the ceiling, she finally allowed herself to breathe, to feel relief, and to embrace the life that had always been hers to reclaim. This was not just the end of a humiliating evening. It was the beginning of a life defined by integrity, courage, and rightful recognition. And the world would never mistake her for invisible again. A year had passed since that fateful Christmas gala, the night that had rewritten Emily's life entirely. The world had moved on, of course. News outlets had long since shifted their attention to other scandals, other billionaires, and other holiday parties. But for Emily, the impact of that night had been permanent, transformative, and deeply personal. She stood on the balcony of her new office, a sleek corner space overlooking the city skyline. The glass walls reflected the morning sun, but inside there was something brighter than light itself. Calm, purpose, and a sense of belonging she had never known before. The Hale Group, once Richard Hale's empire of intimidation, had been transformed. Emily, with Jonathan Reed's guidance, had assumed a leadership role not because of wealth or inheritance, but because of her vision, empathy, and integrity. She had instituted policies ensuring fairness, transparency, and respect for all employees, from executives to janitors. The culture of fear and ego had been replaced with collaboration and dignity. A knock on the door drew her attention. "Emily," said Marissa, her longtime assistant, now also a close friend. "Your first board meeting of the day is ready, and by the way, congratulations. The Reed Family Trust reports are finalized. We're fully operational as of this morning." Emily smiled, a deep, contented smile. "Thank you, Marissa. Let's do it right this time." Marissa lingered for a moment, then asked softly, "Do you ever think about him?" Emily's gaze drifted to the horizon. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but he's exactly where he belongs, learning the hard way what arrogance and cruelty cost. My concern now is for the people I can help, the lives I can improve." Indeed, Richard Hale had faded from prominence. Board had barred him from holding any executive position within the company. Investors and colleagues had quietly cut ties. Public opinion had shifted swiftly. The media no longer celebrated him. The billionaire who had once humiliated Emily publicly now faced ongoing legal scrutiny for his mismanagement, harassment claims, and deceptive financial practices. Justice, slow but inevitable, had caught up with him. Emily's phone buzzed. A message from her father. "Breakfast at the club." "You deserve it." She smiled, recalling the calm, unwavering authority that Jonathan Reed had wielded during that unforgettable night. He hadn't just saved her from humiliation. He had guided her to reclaim her power, ensuring she could stand tall without ever needing to humiliate anyone else. "On my way," she typed back. The year had not been without its challenges. Running Hale Group in the aftermath of such a scandal required strategic finesse and relentless dedication. For the first time, Emily felt in control of her life, not just surviving it. Her phone rang again, this time a video call from an old friend she hadn't seen in years. "Emily," the voice cried, "I saw the gala coverage last year. You were incredible. I can't believe what he did to you and how you handled it." Emily laughed softly. "It was necessary, but that was the old me. Now we're building something new, and no one gets to take that from us." The friend's face softened. "I'm proud. Really proud." Emily felt warmth spread through her chest. For so long, she had been invisible, underestimated, dismissed. But now, recognition wasn't just about power. It was about respect, earned and deserved. Later that day, she visited the newly renovated Hale Grand Hotel. The luxurious ballroom was brighter, the staff more confident, and the atmosphere warmer. Emily walked through the corridors, greeting employees by name, asking about their families, and listening genuinely. A young receptionist approached nervously. "Ms. Hale, thank you for the changes. Working here used to be difficult." Emily knelt slightly, meeting the girl's eyes. "It doesn't have to be. No one should fear their workplace. Remember, it's not about the building or the brand. It's about the people who make it alive." The receptionist's eyes shimmered with gratitude. I understand now. Thank you." Emily smiled. That moment of real human connection, was the reward she had truly been seeking all along. Not the title, not the headlines, but the ability to make life better for those around her. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a short message from Jonathan. "Dinner tonight. The city lights are waiting." Emily chuckled softly. She had learned that while power and recognition were fleeting, family, integrity, and love endured. The bond with her father, once a hidden force guiding her through quiet struggles, had now grown into partnership, mentorship, and deep mutual respect. She paused for a moment, reflecting on Richard Hale. His arrogance and cruelty had been exposed, his empire of fear dismantled. He had become a cautionary tale rather than a titan of industry. It was satisfying, not vindictive justice. The lesson was clear. Character mattered far more than wealth. Reputation could be built or destroyed, but only integrity endured. As evening fell, Emily stood once more on the balcony of her office, watching the city sparkle like a constellation below. Lights reflected in the water, cars moved like veins carrying life through the metropolis, and somewhere in the distance, the faint hum of laughter and music reminded her of the gala a year ago. Only now, the memory brought a smile, not pain. The crowd that once gawked at her humiliation had been replaced by a world that recognized her worth, not because of her marriage, her last name, or her father's fortune, but because of the courage, intelligence, and kindness she had consistently demonstrated. Jonathan joined her on the balcony, quiet for a moment. Then he said softly, "You've changed the trajectory of more than just your life, Emily. You've changed the lives of everyone who works here and even the way people think about power and responsibility." Emily leaned on the railing, looking at the city beneath them. "I've learned that wealth and status are fragile. Kindness, courage, and dignity, those endure. And that's the world I want to live in. That's the world I want to create." Jonathan smiled. "Then keep building it. You've earned the right." She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past year fall away. The tears at the Christmas gala, the fear, the humiliation, they were memories now, not chains. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered. Jonathan placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You never needed me to fight for you, Emily. You fought for yourself. I just reminded you of the power you already had." As night settled, lights from the skyscrapers shimmered across the city, reflecting in the glass walls of the Hale Group headquarters. A year ago, Emily had been on her knees, holding divorce papers, facing public humiliation. Tonight, she was standing tall, a leader, a daughter, and a woman in full command of her life. Somewhere, Richard Hale faced the consequences of his choices, still struggling to regain even a fraction of the respect he had squandered. But Emily's focus was no longer on him. It was on the people she could lift, the lives she could touch, and the legacy she would leave, one of dignity, fairness, and unwavering integrity. The moral of her story was simple but profound. Wealth and power can be fleeting. Titles can be stripped away in an instant, but character, kindness, and courage endure. And those who stand for truth, even when the world seems against them, will always rise. Emily smiled as she turned back into the office. A soft chime announced the arrival of her evening appointment, dinner with Jonathan. The city spread out before them, alive with possibilities, and for the first time in her life, Emily knew that no one, not even the cruelty of a billionaire, could ever define her worth again. The lights twinkled, the city hummed, and a new chapter had begun. The end, or rather the beginning, of a life truly lived.